Hey everybody, long time no see. Okay, this is not going to be a typical video, honestly. I don't know why I just did that weird nervous intro. This isn't a typical video. Frankly, it's actually midnight right now, but I'm in an empty house, so that's not really a big deal. But I just have some thoughts floating through my head, and I kind of just want to voice them while they're still fresh in my mind. I usually do this, even though I should do it more frequently. Then again, half those thoughts are political, and I don't want to make this channel political. But I digress. Because I just had some thoughts floating through my head about Star Wars. And I just wanted to talk about it a bit because it's just... There's something really irritating me about this. Because, of course, as we all know, Star Wars The Last Jedi has been out for the past month. And it's been getting a really, really mixed reaction. And something's bothering me about this because something occurred to me just recently. Because I haven't seen The Last Jedi yet. And I've realized that I don't really want to. At least not in theaters. Like, I want to watch the movie, but I don't feel like going out of my way to watch it in theaters. For the first time ever. Because I have seen all 8 previous Star Wars movies in theaters. I was enthusiastic to see the Star Wars Special Edition. I was enthusiastic to see all the Star Wars prequels back when I was young and dumb and didn't realize they were bad movies. Or at least mediocre movies. I was excited to see The Force Awakens, and I was excited to see Rogue One. I'm not excited to see this movie at all. And, there's multiple factors behind that. I'm also just kind of busy and I'm not a big movie goer to begin with. But there's no enthusiasm here. I have no enthusiasm for The Last Jedi. But I feel like it's tied to things prior to The Last Jedi's release, like prior to the backlash and everything. I feel like at least that's my general sense, that it's tied to things prior to that point. And I kind of wanted to delve into that a little bit because part of me realized that when Rogue One came out, right? I loved Rogue One, right? I loved The Force Awakens when it came out. But after Rogue One came out, I started to realize that there was a lot more wrong with The Force Awakens than I originally realized. Like, when The Force Awakens was the only movie out there, the only movie, it was the only new Star Wars movie out there. It's like the only thing I had to judge on, and it's a good movie, right? It's a fun movie, it's an exciting movie, and everything. And when I saw Rogue One, I realized that Rogue One was the Star Wars movie I had wanted for years. It hits all the right points for me. And I'm not even sure I can still describe that. I'm not even sure I can describe that in words. I'm not sure I can really describe what exactly it is about Rogue One that that makes it like such a good movie to me. What makes it the best Star Wars movie since The Empire Strikes Back for me personally. I'm not gonna speak for any of you, but me personally, Rogue One ranks, probably if you count all the movies, without The Last Jedi, Rogue One definitely ranks like a solid third, after Empire and A New Hope. And it made me start reevaluating what The Force Awakens is. And it made me start to realize that The Force Awakens is a lot more flawed than I realized. And I think that's where a lot of my loss of enthusiasm comes from, is realizing that The Force Awakens is set up a lot of things that ultimately aren't that good. And I should actually go back a little bit, because recently, if any of you, I think I've mentioned it on this channel at least once. I mentioned it on my more politically more oriented podcast before. But I know, I'm pretty sure I mentioned on this channel at least once. If any of you know the site, the review site, SF Debris, Chuck Sonnenberg, the guy who runs it, has done a few series on the making and the development of Star Wars. He started with the hero's journey, which was literally just a story entirely about the backstory of George Lucas and the development of Star Wars Episode 4. Then he did the Shadow's Journey, which is the story of the development of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and how it affected George Lucas. And he most recently did the Hermit's Journey, which is the story of everything after that. The in-between period of between the original trilogy and the prequels, and the development of the prequels and the aftermath of the prequels up to the point where George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney. And in the Hermit's Journey, he goes over how George Lucas kind of created the prequels. He goes over this, like how George Lucas wanted to make the prequels and how he ultimately decided to, make Anakin Skywalker 9 years old in The Phantom Menace. And listening to the story of the development of prequels, it occurs to me that everything that went wrong with the prequels, all the story decisions, all the character decisions, half the directing decisions, all those problems actually stem from George Lucas deciding to make Anakin Skywalker 9 years old in The Phantom Menace because he ended up having to, because a lot of the mistakes that we would later end up perceiving in episodes 2 and 3 stem from that decision, because he ended up locking himself into certain directions. I highly recommend, by the way, that you watch these series yourself. I'm not going to recap the entire things. I'm not going to go over the entire thing with you. I highly recommend that you go to sfdebris.com and watch it. Watch the Hero's Journey, the Shadow's Journey, and the Hermit's Journey yourself. This is a lot of content. There's 9 hours of content here for you to watch, but it is 100% worth it. Because it's very informative and very enlightening, and dispels a lot of the myths actually that have developed around the development of Star Wars, around the development of the prequels. Anyway, a lot of the prequels problems stem from that fact, from George Lucas's decision to create, to center the first movie around child Anakin. Ultimately, basically what you conclude is that it's a very dumb decision. And I'm starting to notice some of those. I'm noticing some of those problems with. With the new trilogy, with The Force Awakens and everything, and I kind of want to break that down a little, because it's actually really bothering me. It's really bothering me because I think it's affecting the overall quality of this new trilogy. And I haven't even seen The Last Jedi, but I've had a lot spoiled for me at this point. And part of the reason so much has been spoiled is because I don't care anymore. Again, I don't care all that much, and that's really frustrating me, that I'm in this position where I'm like, I don't care if I get spoiled anymore because I feel like I'm going to be disappointed anyway. And you might say, oh, but you shouldn't be going into the movie with preconceptions. But the problem is that a lot of these preconceptions already existed. That's a huge part of the problem. These preconceptions already existed, and they're just being reinforced by what I'm hearing about the movie. But one of the biggest things that's been bothering me, one of the biggest problems that's been bothering me about The Force Awakens is how it kind of resets everything. And first of all, I think one of the big problems is that Disney, first of all, went to J.J. Abrams to reboot the trilogy, or to reboot the franchise even. And bear in mind, I like J.J. Abrams. I respect him as a filmmaker. I think that he's ultimately a very good guy. I think that he makes good movies, but the thing about it is that he doesn't make particularly deep or complex movies. And I'm not saying that our Star Wars is deep and artistic or anything like that, right? I'm not saying that but what I'm saying is that it's nuanced. For what you get, it's very nuanced. It resonates with you, and it hits. And if you watch it again and again, it starts to hit you on a deeper and deeper level. When I was a little kid, the thing I love about Star Wars is the space battles. I love the X-wings, and I love the lasers, and I loved all that. But as I got older, I started to appreciate the various aspects of the Star Wars movies a lot more, and I also started to realize that the prequel trilogy is just not all that good, and that's important because it's kind of how I started to view The Force Awakens. Because The Force Awakens has a very serious flaw. Because J.J. Abrams tried to basically just reset the franchise, just like he did with Star Trek, because he tried to reset the franchise, he basically created a scenario where, well, basically we're in an Empire versus Rebel Alliance conflict again, instead of a new conflict where it's like New Republic versus Imperial Remnant or something. As new as you can call that, of course, because, of course, we're talking about something that was already done in Legends. But he basically recreated the scenario of the original trilogy. The problem is that the original trilogy was its own scenario, and trying to recreate it doesn't work that way. Because if you think about it, the fall of the Empire is going to be a very, very nuanced event. It's going to be a very big event. It's not just going to be, oh, well, you kind of just, the Empire falls and the Republic rises. It's nice and clean. It's not going to be that. I mean, just look at Earth's own history. If you look at the rise and fall of nations, look at some of the biggest, most important, collapses in history, the collapse of Rome, or say the fall of any number of dynasties in China. If you look at it, things descend into chaos for a time. China is a particularly good example of this, where, like a dynasty will fall and, the country would just descend into, 2 to 5 decades of utter chaos. Chaos where there's warlords everywhere and there's rebels everywhere, and it takes a lot of time to try and get the country back into an organized state. Or take when Rome collapsed and nothing was ever quite the same. It's the history after that, history for the next 1500 years is basically of dozens of nation states vying for power and control between each other. It's not neat or anything. Now, I'll grant you that in Star Wars we also have the Empire is just the outgrowth of an established of a previously established government, right? The Old Republic. And in that regard, there's going to naturally be more stability than what you would find on Earth. But there should still be instability. And in that regard, Legends actually got that right. As much of a mess as the old expanded universe is, with a lot of bad stories and everything, it gets it right in the fact that once the Empire collapses, because the Empire is so focused so heavily on a single strong man at the top, Emperor Palpatine, the Empire's end would result in a lot more chaos than the Empire's rise did. The Empire's rise, in fact, would be very easy, precisely because, as the new Thrawn novel illustrates, everybody's tired after the Clone Wars. Everybody's exhausted after the Clone Wars. So it's very plausible that my complaints about how the Empire rose aside, it's very plausible that people would still accept the Empire as an alternative to the chaos of the Clone Wars. But after 2.5 decades, roughly, of Imperial rule, there's going to be a lot of chaos. There's going to be a lot of trouble on the horizon. Warlordism makes a lot of sense in the aftermath of the Empire. It makes sense that there's going to be a galactically significant, politically significant galactic empire after the Empire surrenders to the New Republic. It's not like it's not like Masameda is going to go, well, you kind of screwed us over at Jakku. We should probably, we should probably end this war. Yeah, sure, it's going to result in a good portion of the Empire becoming the New Republic. But the entire Empire is not going to become the New Republic overnight. There's going to be, there's going to be a large portion of the Imperial population that's still going to be like, well, we kind of preferred the Empire, actually. We don't want to go back to the chaos of the pre-Empire. It's entirely feasible that's going to happen. And it's entirely feasible that that's the kind of scenario you're going to find. You're going to find these kinds of disruptions. But The Force Awakens didn't give us that. The Force Awakens gave us something that was far too neat and tidy for what it was. And I think that's really, and for me personally, for someone who really, when it comes to his fiction, really loves history and nuance and, sort of the political ramifications of what happens, of major, what happens in the aftermath of major events, whether it's the death of Emperor Palpatine, or the death of the druid Alenon, or the death of Paul Atreides, or the fall of Numenor. The implications of, when you get down to it, you need to think about the implications of major events in a fictional universe's history. You can't get away from it. If you don't do that, you're going to create something that's incredibly shallow and hard to enjoy, at least for me personally. And that's what The Force Awakens did. The Force Awakens tried to say, well, the Battle of Jakku happened and everything was tied up in a neat and tidy bow. And that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense in my mind. It doesn't make sense, I think, in a more literal sense. And there's further problems. For example, the New Republic's demilitarization. Why would the New Republic demilitarize within 2 decades of the fall of the Empire? Why? The Empire should still be fairly fresh in the minds of a lot of people in the galaxy. The galaxy is populated by 100 trillion. Anyway, the galaxy is still inhabited by 100 trillion people. And I think we can reasonably assume that at least two-thirds of those people remember the Galactic Empire. They remember the Imperial era. And I think we can further surmise that maybe another 30 to 40% of those people remember the Clone Wars. I think that's reasonable. So we're talking about 40 trillion people who remember the Clone Wars, and 60 to 70 trillion people who remember Imperial rule. Why would that lead to a demilitarization? From a certain aspect, I can understand why you would demilitarize, because you're trying to decentralize the military again. You're trying to get away from the imperial model of a fully centralized military and kind of bring it around to, okay, we have sector defense forces again. We have a central military now because we don't want to repeat the Clone Wars situation. So we have a central military again, but it's just like one home fleet. It's a few armies and some patrol fleets. But there's going to be more than just the home fleet. There's just going to be more than just the home army on orbit around your capital planet, whether it's Hosnia Prime or whatever. You're going to have more than that. And at the very least, you're going to have the various sector defense fleets, that are going to be loyal and are going to fight against the First Order. But instead, from what I understand, and The Last Jedi reinforces this, from what I understand, the home fleet is all the New Republic had. And that is absolutely stupid and lazy. It's not even stupid. It's not just stupid. It's lazy. It's lazy writing. They just, the JJ and whoever else was writing The Force Awakens just wanted to recreate the Empire Rebel Alliance paradigm without thinking at all why it wouldn't make sense 30 years later to have it again. And that actually aggravates me as someone who loves the kind of nuance that you find in Dune or Lord of the Rings or in the Shannara series. Instead, what you get is this. You get this lazy repetition of this lazy repetition of something that already existed. And that for me is absolutely it's one of the most frustrating things about The Force Awakens, and one of the things that has really soured me on the rest of this, soured me on not even the rest of the trilogy necessarily, but on The Last Jedi. Now maybe I'll watch it myself and actually be pleasantly surprised and discover that the backlash is a little overblown. But I feel like it's not, because all of these important aspects, all of this geopolitical, so to speak, ramifications of the aftermath of the Battle of Endor has not been thought through fully. You know, they took a very lazy and cheap route from the Battle of Endor to the Return of the Jedi to the Force Awakens without any real nuance. And I find that disappointing. And then there's other aspects too, you know, there's other aspects in terms of how complex and nuanced the writing in The Force Awakens is compared to the original trilogy. And I could spend another 20 minutes talking about that, frankly, like talking about, say, how the humor is very clumsy and ill-considered. It's very reflective of modern humor rather than instead of like more nuanced, what I consider real humor, you know, the kind of humor that grows naturally out of character interactions and so forth, you know. I was over the Thanksgiving holiday, I visited my parents. A lot's been going on, and I decided to visit my parents. It cost me a lot of money, but it was worth it. But my mother and I were watching Adywan Star Wars Revisited fan edits of the Star Wars films. So far, New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back have been done, and I was starting work on Return of the Jedi. And we noticed that there was a lot of humor in these movies. You know, that these movies have a lot of humor in them. But the thing is that the humor isn't direct, laugh out loud, ha ha, funny humor, you know, like you would find in, say, a Marvel superhero film, right? A lot of it grows out of the characters. Take, for instance, this scene out of The Empire Strikes Back.
Well, Your Highness, guess this is it.
That's right.
Don't get all mushy on me. So long, Princess.
Han!
Yes, Your Highness.
I thought you had decided to stay.
Well, the bounty hunter we ran into when Lord Mendel changed my mind.
Han, we need you.
We need?
Yes.
Well, what about you need?
I know. I don't know what you're talking about.
Probably don't.
And what precisely am I supposed to know?
Come on. You want me to stay because of the way you feel about me?
Yes. You're a great help to us. You're a natural leader.
No. That's not it.
Come on.
Come on.
You're imagining things.
Am I? Then why are you following me? Afraid I was gonna leave without giving you a goodbye kiss?
I just assumed he's a Wookiee.
I can arrange that. You could use a good kiss.
This scene is much more nuanced than you realize, because, you know, this scene is inherently comedic, right? It's two people in their 20s, Han may even be 30 at this point, you know, arguing like a couple of lovesick teenagers in the middle of a military base while people are trying to push past them. It's funny, but it's not laugh out loud funny. On repeat viewings, you start to laugh at it more, but it's not ha ha hilarious. Whereas, what's the funniest joke in The Force Awakens? Personally, I would say it's probably that time when Finn's trying to come up with a plan to find Rey in Starkiller Base, and Han's motioning to Rey climbing on the wall in the background, and Finn's getting offended because he thinks that Han's just dismissing him. It's funny, but it's obvious funny. It's obvious humor. Of course this is funny. It's meant to be funny. Whereas the humor from The Empire Strikes Back, or say any of the banter between Han and Luke or whoever in A New Hope, grows out of the characters naturally. And that's just another minor detail that's worth noting about how these new movies seem to be differing significantly from the older movies. I'm not saying that things don't change or that cultures don't change and so forth, But I am noticing that it's not capturing me in the same way. You know, whereas Rogue One does these things better. A lot of Rogue One's humor develops naturally out of the characters. Sure, Sir K2SO's humor is very direct humor, but it's very direct humor in the same vein as the droid humor from the original trilogy. C-3PO and R2-D2's vein of humor is not necessarily nuanced. It's definitely the most explicit humor in the entirety of the movies. But it's not like it's not like obvious stupid slapstick or anything. It grows out of these characters are supposed to be this way. Or say Chirrut saying, "Are you kidding me? I'm blind," when he's being, when he's getting a sack, thrown over his head. Of course he's gonna say that. It's natural. It's not forced humor. Of course he would say something like that. It's because it's silly they would do it. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. My point is that it's really my point ultimately is, frankly, that this stuff is just bothering me. It's bothering me because I shouldn't be in this position. I shouldn't be in a position where I'm not really sure if I want to see a Star Wars movie. Why am I in a position where I'm I don't know if I want to watch a Star Wars movie in the theaters? Yeah, that's exactly where I am. And I find that alarming, and I feel like it's a bad sign. I feel like it's a bad sign for the future of the Star Wars of the Star Wars franchise. It makes me nervous about what Solo is going to be too. Coming out in just 4 months. What's Solo going to be like? I don't know. And I'm legitimately concerned. As someone who has loved Star Wars since before he can remember, and that's literally true. I cannot remember when I first started liking Star Wars. I just remember liking it since my childhood. It's there, this is alarming, and I hate it. I hate it. Anyway, all right. That's enough of this midnight post. I'm actually drinking some sleepy time tea from Celestial Seasonings, and it's going to start making me conk out soon because, well, it actually helps me sleep. But I want to thank you for watching this sort of just the stream of consciousness that lasted 25 minutes longer, probably longer. I wasn't really timing it. And I'll get you next time. I'm sure there'll be more to say and to do and to talk about. And from what I understand, the new version of Divide and Conquer is supposed to be coming out sometime in the near future. I may just have to dust off the old Total War shoes and give it a go. Until next time, everybody.